All right. Hello, everyone. We are officially live on Zoom and on Facebook Live to host today's webinar, Transforming Communities, based on the book by Sandhya Jha, who is our special guest joining us, as well as her colleague and fellow changemaker, Dana Bainbridge, who is featured in the book Transforming Communities. We're going to talk a little bit about the book, but we're going to talk a little bit more with Dana and Shonda about what it is to be a transformer, what it is to live in this place where you see the potential for transformation and work with your community to see what's possible and working together to get that. The full title of the book is Transforming Communities, How People Like You Are Healing Their Neighborhoods. And we want to lean into that people like you part. So we are talking with Reverend Dana Bainbridge and we're talking with Reverend Sandhya Jha, but we also want to hear from you. So we'll take a couple of breaks during our conversation to take your questions. If you're working with us on or listening to us on Zoom, then you should see probably at the bottom of your screen, although it could also be at the top, an option for a Q&A, which is a little box with a Q on it, or a chat, which has a little conversation bubble with 3 dots inside. Either one of those options will allow you to leave us some questions in our hopper so that when we do take breaks, we can take those questions. So I see that a few folks have started to join us. Thank you so much. If you want, feel free to use the chat box as a little practice now and tell us what city and state you're in. We'd love to see kind of where our folks are calling in from. And if you're not calling in from the United States, go ahead and tell us that too. I did see a couple of interesting email addresses that gave a note that we might have a little bit of a global conversation today. So I'm excited. Yes, see, Vancouver, British Columbia is coming in all the way to Overland Park, Kansas. It is so good to see you guys checking in. Another British Columbia, Rossland, British Columbia. Beautiful. So we're looking forward to talking with you guys again. If you're just checking in, my name is Ayana Johnson-Watkins. I'm the director of the Incubate Initiative here at the National Benevolent Association, and I have the pleasure of hosting this conversation on transforming communities. We are co-hosting this conversation with Chalice Press, our illustrious publisher who works with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, as well as others who are publishing material to help you transform your communities. So we're proud to be working with them. They are the publisher for Transforming Communities. And we are, of course, also joined by our conversationalist today, the author of Transforming Communities, Reverend Sandhya Jha, and a featured changemaker in the book, Reverend Dana Bainbridge. And you'll hear a little bit from them in a second. Let me just check back in and see where people are checking in from. Tacoma, Washington, DeLand, Florida. I've never even heard of that. And I've been to a lot of places in Florida. Prairie Village, Kansas. That's not far from where I live. Like a little Kansas shout out here. So thank you guys for checking in. What we're also going to do is give you a chance to practice using the polling question that you may see on your page. So as you're checking in, I see folks are still checking in, and that's great. I'm going to start with a little poll question that you can answer that asks about what setting you're working in. Where you're hoping to perhaps transform a community or join in a transformation effort that's already taking place. So you should see on your screen a little poll question, just one question. What is the setting in which you are serving or hoping to serve? So you have a congregational option, the nonprofit or community organization option, the neighborhood group, or other. You guys are doing great. Not everybody figures this out in the first 5 seconds, but our viewers are figuring this out. So as they take the quiz, I also want to introduce to you the 2 other beautiful faces you see on the screen, Danny Cartwright and Larry Morris. They're going to be helping us behind the scenes to help gather your questions and look for you on Facebook if that's where you're watching, or to look for your comments here in Zoom. If you have any technical questions as well, for some reason all of a sudden you can't hear, or your video is freezing up, please do let them know, and they can try and respond to you in real time. For your questions that relate to our panelists today, we'll answer those questions about every 15 minutes when we take a few breaks during our conversation. All right? You guys are doing great with this poll. I'm going to go ahead and close it so our panelists can see who we're working with so far. So, of the folks that have answered and checked in so far, we have 13, or almost nearly 100%, are working from a congregational or a church setting. And that'll be good to know for our conversation today. And then we have a few folks who are checking in from neighborhood groups and nonprofits. So thank you so much. We may launch this poll again halfway through and just see where people are then. But it's exciting to see your feedback so far. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, I'm sorry you don't have a chance to participate in the poll, but next time you'll come on over to Zoom and register, and then you get all the benefits of membership. I'm just messing with you. All right. So why don't we get started? We have plenty of good stuff to talk about today. And I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from all of our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Reverend Sandhya Jha first. She is the founder and director of the Oakland Peace Center, but she's also a longtime organizer. She is an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And I would love for her to just take a few minutes and to tell us a little bit more about who you are, Sandhya, and what you're doing over there at the Oakland Peace Center, as well as why you do the things that you do. We'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. And I thought it might be fun for folks to first get to see a little picture of the folks from First Christian Church of Oakland. I was just with them, I want to say a couple of months ago. And so let me figure out if I can share screen.
I believe in you, Sandhya.
All right. So this is, let's see if I can do it. This is a picture of the folks from First Christian Church of Oakland. And if you count, you can see 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 folks in that picture. And the reason I wanted to share that with you, the people of First Christian Church of Oakland, is because I'd like for you to get a glimpse of what it is that they have gone on to create by launching the Oakland Peace Center. Thank you all for indulging me in this because the technology is still a little bit new to me. Shoot, let's try that again. Here's what they're up to now. The Oakland Peace Center, which the members of First Christian Church of Oakland launched, now is a network of 42 nonprofits, and some of whom are in a 40,000 square foot building. And they reached over 86,000 people in Oakland and the Bay Area last year. So some people have a narrative that transformation has to do with growing in numbers, growing in membership, getting more people into worship on Sunday. And I feel like First Christian Church of Oakland is showing us that there is another way of doing transformation. So that congregation was 10 people in worship when I started working with them 12 years ago. And there were 11 of them in that picture that I showed you a month ago. But how many churches do you know that actually have reached 86,000 people? And I'm talking about people in jails and prisons who now know how to create Kingian nonviolence models, kids in schools all across the county who are learning strategies for ending bullying, African immigrants who now have access to resources and who know their rights when ICE shows up at their doorstep, people who are making a huge difference in the world, right? 86,000 lives have been changed. And it all happened because about 10 years ago, the members of First Christian Church of Oakland said, we don't have a lot of energy. We don't have any money. But we know God wants us to be about the work of peace in the midst of violence in the city of Oakland. And because they were willing to put everything into that calling, even though their numbers didn't grow, their impact has grown. Not, I don't know what's bigger than exponentially, but it's bigger than exponentially. And so for me, I kind of think what keeps me going is over and over, I bump into other stories like the story of First Christian Church of Oakland, where a handful of folks ends up making a massive difference. And I feel like in the world we inhabit right now, where if all we listened to was the news, the only narrative we would have is we are powerless to stop the horrors that are happening in our nation and our world. If we step away from that narrative and look around us, we might bump into a whole bunch of folks, like the folks at First Christian Church of Oakland, who are affecting tens of thousands of lives because no one told them they couldn't. So that's a little bit of my story.
Thanks so much, Shonda. That's beautiful. And a good start for us. And wildly different and yet interestingly similar to the journey that Reverend Dana Bainbridge has been on. So I would love it, Dana, if you would tell us what you're doing now, what you're working on. Dana is the pastor of First Christian Church San Jose, as well as the founder and development director at Recovery Café San Jose. So if you could tell us a little bit about those settings and a little bit about why you do what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Ayanna and Shonda. It's so great to be a part of this event today. And I guess I would just say we echo so much exactly what Shonda just said. It's really a small group of people at First Christian Church San Jose. And I as well have a few slides I'm going to see if I can pull up here myself and share with you just a little bit of our journey that we've been on. We are in this kind of amazing location in San Jose here, where we are tucked right behind, this is our city hall in San Jose. That's kind of this awesome structure. And this is where all the demonstrations and gatherings happen. And we're tucked right back here behind this rotunda and between the Martin Luther King Library over here of San Jose State University. So we're in a very, very urban setting. And so when I interviewed with First Christian about 10 years ago, I love their mission statement. They said that they were a church to be in recovery from and resistance to the dominant culture, which I never had heard of a church with that kind of mission statement. And I really liked it. And that they were, weren't waiting for the kingdom of God to come in another life, but our job was to be about that here and now. And so we found ourselves here in San Jose in the midst of a huge homeless crisis. We became known in the news as the place where the greatest wealth disparities are here in the Silicon Valley. And the jungle, this place called the Jungle existed, which was an encampment of thousands of people in the creeks. And so they moved people out of the jungles and they came out onto the streets, and many of them landed in front of our own building. Right here you can see an encampment that ended up in front of our building for over a year. And what the city wanted to do, though, was to be able to work with people, which was a lot harder to do when they were in the creeks. And our congregation had been working with people for many years before I came here 10 years ago, providing survival services like shelter and meals, very generously offering the building. And even though they're like First Christian Oakland, there's only really about 15 people left in the congregation, and the congregation was running out of money and energy for doing all these things. They really still wanted their building to be used to serve the community, and so they wanted to bring somebody to see if we could find a different way, a more sustainable way to do this. So what we did after a while, actually we tried to tweak some of the things that we were already doing, the emergency shelter and meals, and then what happened was actually many people started that we knew were dying right before our own eyes. And one of them died on the steps of our church, which was just incredibly heartbreaking for us and people we had grown to love and know. And so we started to ask if we could do this a different way, if we could start to see people get better through the things we were doing. So we heard about this place called Recovery Café in Seattle. We went to visit them, and the two people you see there are the two people from our church board, Jim Thompson, Sandhya Jha. We went, and you see on the right the Recovery Café Seattle that we had heard a lot about, and their beautiful space, which they say they try to create space that says to people who come in that you matter. And that's what they did. And so we were so excited about what they were doing. We asked them to teach us to do it. And so we came back, and it took us 2 or 3 years to even get open. And these are a number of the steps we went through in those 2 to 3 years, just a little at a time, discerning whether a congregation was really called to start a recovery cafe in our building. And we then created a launch team and a business plan and worked with our partners and did all these other kind of things you have to do to start a nonprofit. But what we were really doing was trying to take the brokenness in our hearts from the people we had lost and the people who had mattered so much to us, and turn it into something beautiful, into the healing community model that Recovery Cafe was. So 4 years ago, and we think it's pretty great that we're sort of those fools for Christ, I guess you will say, in a way. On April Fools, we opened our doors. A group of we think of ourselves most of the time as pretty incompetent people, but we were willing, and our hearts were open. And so these are some of the things that we did in the early years of having Recovery Cafe. First year we established our recovery circles, which are the core part of the cafe community, and then we developed our School for Recovery, which has a lot of other resources that support people on their journeys through recovery and through job searching and through just inner healing. That's really important to us too, is that the inner healing that people need happens as well as the outer resources. And lots of drop-in activities that we do that are both fun and informational, bringing other resources in from community partners, and special events. We have some great parties in the cafe and open mic nights that are sometimes extraordinary and sometimes really campy. But most of all, it's about building community so that people can be participating in all these things and really build positive, healthy relationships. And the last thing we did was to really had a vision to renovate our facility like Seattle had. We had an architect and a designer who'd worked with us for a number of years. And so just in January this year, we reopened, and I just wanted to show you a few pictures of what we were able to do to renovate our facility through a $1.2 million grant from the city of San Jose, who is really supportive of our vision to create this healing community for those struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental health challenges. So these are some of our new classrooms and our cafe space and kitchen. And most of all, these are the faces of the people who are our members, and people who have been on amazing transformational journeys and who are our community. So that's a little bit of our story anyway, and how we've been on this kind of incredible journey together.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Just beautiful birth stories, if you will, origin stories for each of your projects, ministries, organizations. I want to recap a little bit because I just remembered to press record somewhere in the middle of Dana's conversation. So I'll recap for the video later that we heard from Shonda first about the Oakland Peace Center, which she helped found alongside First Christian Church Oakland. And especially with the use of their space. They had this really wonderful church space, but just about 10 or 11 people in worship, in their membership. And with that start, they were able to move to a place where they were serving 42 nonprofits and reaching 86,000 people in a given year. Is that right, Shonda? Did I get those numbers right? In like fashion, about 10 people at First Christian Church San Jose 10 years ago, when Dana came in, like so many new clergy do, saying what, I got a new call and let's see what's going on here, doing that experience, and encountered a church that was ready to do revolution. They had this thing that their mission was to stand in recovery from and resistance to the dominant culture. What a beautiful thing. You're right. That is not a mission statement I see a lot.
And I actually, if it's okay for me to jump in, I was talking with a friend this past weekend, and she's working with a congregation, and she was reading the chapter about Recovery Café San Jose, and she said, it stopped me in my tracks because I realized my church is better resourced and we have more people. But I got to that line that said, of course they went into the direction of doing this recovery cafe for the intersection of mental health and homelessness and addiction issues, because they already knew what their purpose was. They already knew that they were a church oriented around recovery, including recovery from the dominant paradigm. And the same thing was true for First Christian Church of Oakland. As long as we just wanted to be a place that helped a bunch of people around whatever issues happened to show up, we were never going to get any traction. But those folks got really clear that what they wanted to contribute to was ending the cycle of violence in Oakland. And I feel like that's an important part of the story that can't be overemphasized.
It's really true, especially since creating a mission for a church can feel like such drudgery to some. And, what is the point of this? We're just going to put it away and not look at it again. But those churches that really take the time and find who they are in the world and who God has called them to be on their corner of wherever, in the global society, are able to do amazing things, who really internalize that mission and then embody that mission in their communities, are able to do amazing things. I do not want to miss that these are both small congregations, especially since so many of you are checking in from congregational settings. These are really small congregations, some that people would come in and take one look and say, I think you guys need to close it up, shut it down, figure out what your last service is going to be. I'll help you, I'll preach the service, but these are congregations that decided, no, God is still calling us. God still has something for us to do. And we're going to walk into that with what we have, right?
And could I jump in on that as well? So one of the things that happened to us is when we received that money from the city, we had to sign this 15-year agreement that we would use half of our building for the Recovery Cafe programs. And we looked at each other and we realized, well, there go the funeral lunches and there go the wedding receptions and all this, because that's our social hall. And we looked at each other and everybody went, well, what else would we do? This is what we do. And I think it is because we had been doing this already, and we really found that going deeper into it was really creating so much more transformation for everyone, for us and everyone else as well. And so it really wasn't all that much of a struggle to make that kind of a step or decision.
And I think the untold part of that story is, I think a lot of churches I've worked with don't want to choose, because they're like, but we have members who care about the environment, and we have members who care about homelessness, and we have members who care about LGBT folks, and we have members who care about racism. And my experience has been, if you go deep on one issue, you will not be able to avoid dealing with the other issues. You'll just have a lens through which to deal with them. So a church that's really committed to LGBT justice, they're going to have to deal with immigration, because LGBTQ folks are being deported to countries that will kill them. So if you're going to do LGBT justice well, you're going to have to deal with immigration. And if you deal with LGBT justice, you're going to have to deal with mental health, because the mental health crisis is affecting LGBTQ youth, because the situations they're pushed into create mental health crises and homelessness. And so if you choose that issue, it doesn't mean giving up the other ones. It just means being able to do them well. So I wanted to mention that too, because a lot of folks struggle with, but Jesus calls us to do all of them. Yeah, but you can still do them through a particular lens, and that's been the case for us with peace, and I know that's been the case for Dana around recovery.
No, it's an excellent point. I mean, we don't want to have to choose, right? We want to do all the good we can in all the places we can, but sometimes the way you do that is by going deep in one thing. Pastor Frank Thomas, is at CTS now, in Indianapolis, used to always say, if you can go deep on a thing, if you go deep enough, it becomes universal. And so if we can push some of these things deep enough, it can go universal. I want to take a little break. This is later than we said we would, but I just wanted to check in with Danny and Larry and see if any questions had come out that we can address. In the meantime, if you haven't already, go ahead and check in on chat and let us know some of the issues that concern you. You can go ahead and post those in chat yourself. I see we don't have any questions coming in through Q&A. So yes, go ahead, use the chat. Let us know what things are concerning in your setting, what kind of issues you would like to work on. Is it recovery? Is it veterans issues? Is it immigration? Is it voter engagement? What are the kinds of things that feel pressing to you? We'd love to get a sense of those. Excellent. So feel free to pop those up as they come up for you. I'm gonna take this chance now to go ahead and press in the direction that we were already headed, which is what do each of you say when you're faced with someone, maybe Shonda who read your book or Dana who visited the cafe and it's like, wow, this is wonderful. I mean, you must just be so gifted to have done this and so brave and so courageous. I could never do such a thing. What do you say to those who feel overwhelmed by what you've done, inspired, but not moved to to do the same thing?
I say it's true. There's nobody quite like Dana.
I agree.
Oh, well, what I'd say too is, of course you can't. Of course we couldn't. And that's the beauty of it, because then you have to need other people. Then you have to reach out and build all kinds of partnerships and find new people who can do all the things that you can't do. And I think that's the best part. In fact, I think I would worry about anybody who thinks they can do it all, because it's enormous to create a nonprofit or to create a kind of a ministry or organization like Shonda talked about, of the kind of scale that they're reaching, the 86,000 people there in Oakland, amazing. But when you start to collaborate and bring all kinds of other people together, that's just when everything starts to multiply, and you find that you're able to do all kinds of things that you couldn't do.
I mean, collaboration is just one of the most fundamental principles of community, right? That I don't have to have it all because my neighbors have something I need. The other businesses in the neighborhood, they may have something I need. They may have, expertise and other things that can help all of us get our shared goals met. Thank you for lifting that up. It's just so important. It's the preacher I was listening to on Sunday at church said, if your vision fits within your budget, then your vision is not of God. Your vision should be beyond what you think you can manage, and then it's the right size. So I just wanted to echo that with you. I want to check in. We are getting a couple questions in. Suzanne is asking, what are helpful processes that a congregation can use to affirm who they are? How can they get to that place where they can say, okay, this is who we are. This is what God is calling us to do.
So at First Christian Church of Oakland, I brought in a friend of mine who had been really involved in congregational transformation work, and he worked with the congregation for an afternoon just to say, so what is it you want to be for the neighborhood? Let's distill it down to a few things. And what they named at that point in time, because you don't live in Oakland without losing people in the streets. And so for them, what the church offered them that they wanted to offer the community was a place of peace in the midst of violence, an experience of family in the midst of the brokenness of families around us, and the ability to access the divine. And what's really interesting is, even though the Oakland Peace Center, the nonprofit that they founded, is a secular nonprofit organization, that's exactly the grounding of the Oakland Peace Center as well. So that's been kind of carried on as the church's legacy. And really all it was an appreciative inquiry process that said, what is it that makes you come here? that you want to give back to the people in your neighborhood.
Mm.
It wasn't a very complicated process. It was something that a clergy colleague of mine was completely capable of facilitating, so that we had, an outside expert, but he was just a buddy of mine from down the road. And it was a church that was willing to say, we know what it is that causes the 10 of us to keep showing up every week, that's worthwhile, that we think other people could get something out of. It wasn't actually a complicated situation. Now, what we did from there was pretty intentional. It was, okay, we don't want to do this by ourselves. We can't do it by ourselves. So who's already doing that, right? Because congregational transformation is founded in that notion of assuming that God's already at work in the world and figuring out how to partner with God. So we were like, so who is it that's working to end violence? How do we show up and say, we want to volunteer. We want to help you. What do you need? You want us to hang up signs in local businesses around silence the violence? Okay. You want us to show up at the baseball game for Silence the Violence Day? Sure. You want us to table at your resource fair? We can do that. You need bouncers at your hip hop concert for youth? Okay, we'll be there. So it also required the folks to be like, right, we don't have to do it all. We can connect with the people who are already doing it, and we'll show up in the ways that they need us to show up. And in the process, we'll learn how to do this better. And I know, Dana, you kind of had some similar processes, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that you do, and I know NBA has hosted another webinar on this, is this whole idea of community organizing. And I think when we were already as part of a community organizing organization here, and so we had a local organizing committee. We were doing some research on issues, and part of when you have an LOC like that, you're starting to say what's going on in the community that we want to address? What's an unmet need, like you indicated, Shonda, and what's something that speaks to our heart? That sense of Buechner's quote, our call is where the world's need and our passion meet. And if you look around and other people are doing other things, there's no reason to invent something new. Like Shonda said, either join them if that's what you really care about, or if there is a real unmet need. And that's what happened with the Recovery Cafe model in Seattle. What Killian No, who founded the original Recovery Cafe, did was she looked around her community, Seattle, when she moved there. And she had a lot of experience in starting recovery-based organizations. And she felt like the unmet need was a long-term day center that people could be a part of on an ongoing basis. There were a lot of short-term recovery programs that kind of dropped people off the cliff after about 30 or 90 days. But there was nothing for people in an ongoing way that was really accessible long-term. And so they created a model that met an unmet need that they saw in their community. And so I think, asking those questions, especially my sense is if you address an unmet need that the community really needs, then it's a lot easier to get people to really believe in your vision, because they're desperate for somebody to do something about this. And they're willing to fund it, and the people are willing to volunteer and get involved.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I mean, you're hearing it. I mean, those of you who are listening, you're hearing it. I'm hearing it from the both of you, this sense of it begins with listening, with asking yourself the important questions of what your call is and what you feel you're being called to do, as well as asking the community you're with, that you're serving, what do you need? You tell me, and then I'll work with it on your terms, which sounds easy. It's easy to say, but it's something that a lot of us struggle with, because we get in our heads an idea of what it means to help and what people need. And then we launch right out into that, and we are well-meaning and yet destructive often at the same time. This touches a question that two of our folks have lifted in different ways, and so I'll try and combine them as authentically as I can. But it takes us a bit of a step back. This is, how do you work with your community? So your community of your church or the folks that you're already around, your neighbors, who see the other in such a way that they're too different from them to help, that the reason that they may be facing poverty or facing addiction is a failing of theirs, and not something that they can, that it's even their responsibility to help with. So both of you are describing environments and neighbors who are saying, we want to do something to help. But what about those who need to be convinced, as it were, in a way? Is that even worth it? How do you get to that place where you can start to talk with people about privilege and systemic oppression and those pieces?
So let me, if I forget this, remind me. I want to talk about Jesus in a second. That won't surprise most of the people who know me on this call. Let me really quickly share, in the book, Transforming Communities, I focused on 10 different models and structures that regular folks used to affect community change. Asset-based community development. Dana's chapter, The Power of Listening, was about one-to-ones and World Café. Restorative justice models. Organizing that is done by people who are impacted by unjust policies. Do interfaith work to address hate crimes, economic empowerment models, truth and reconciliation models, community gardens as a tool of the revolution, and faith-rooted organizing, as well as what it means to create a culture within a community, which is the last chapter. And I didn't mean to take you out of that. I meant to say the thing that all of those chapters had in common, the thing that those case studies that I focused on had in common, was they started with solutions that emerged from the community. They prioritized the experiences of people on the margins. Community members were in dialogue with each other. All of those case studies were sustainable over time. They started based in relationship, and so they weren't focused on a quick fix, but on a different vision of the neighborhood or a different version. They focused on possibilities, not only problems, and they came from regular people and were collaborative. And the reason I wanted to share that was to say, Jesus, like I said, we all know the story of Jesus and the rich young man, and how Jesus said, all you have to do is this thing, give away everything you have and give it to the poor. And the rich man walked away sad because he had many possessions. Jesus didn't chase after him and say, let me explain to you why you should be a part of this movement. Let me convince you that it's worth giving up your possessions. Jesus was sad that the guy walked away because he knew that guy's life would be better if he joined this movement, but he let him walk away. And what he did instead was focus on the term that George W. Bush gave us, the coalition of the willing. He focused on the folks who were like, yep, this is not working. And so I think for me, this work happens best when it starts with the people who already get it and then builds out. And that means leaving some folks behind, and that means doing work by a small committee within the congregation that then builds out. It means a couple of folks are getting to know the folks from impacted communities and then bringing those stories back to the congregation. Maybe I'm old and cynical, but I'm not trying to convince folks that they should be a part of this movement, because there are so many people out there who know this world is messed up and want to be a part of doing better. Let's focus on giving them the chance to do that, rather than wasting our energy trying to convince the rich young ruler that no, really, he should join the movement. That's maybe not the most helpful advice for everybody who's in congregational ministry, but it sure helped me.
Well, I think it's meaningful in that it follows a community organizing principle too, which is spend more of your time with people who are on the fence than people who have already made their decision, right? So it's that same principle of speak to those who are teachable, work with those who are willing to listen, because so much of this work is listening. that if you're working with folks who aren't willing to listen, you're already fighting a losing battle, and you're that much farther from being able to do the work you want to do. And there's a little bit of commentary coming from the chat box to the same degree, saying living and doing ministry in a community that lacks diversity also doesn't make room for these conversations very easily. And that's true, and sort of names one of the elephants in the room, which is either that the church community itself is made up of and situated in a place where folks don't have immediate needs and don't have to be exposed to others who do have immediate needs, or the church is situated in a place where needs are real and visible, but the folks who attend that church don't live there and don't have to face those on a daily basis. And so they have sort of the luxury of walking away. And I think in the ways that I've heard from some of our other partners through NBA, and particularly from Deetra Baker, one of the strong lessons I learned was the power of the pulpit. So I know that some of you who are listening are pastors, are those who have access to that microphone. And that is where you start to do some of the teaching that can change minds. That's where you work on changing hearts, not when you're ready to do organizing. When you're ready to do organizing, go with the willing. But the groundwork you can lay in the preaching moment, in the Bible study moments, even in your pastoral care. Those are the places where you can start to lay the groundwork so that you get to a place where, for example, when Deetra Baker was pastoring Liberation Christian Church, she had been preaching liberation so hard in this portion of St. Louis that when the Ferguson uprising took place, her people beat her to the street because they already intuitively understood that it was their role as Jesus people, as liberators, to be in the space where people needed liberation. And so there's some pre-work that has to happen, and that may be your radical movement for now. That may be the way you start to transform your community, is you start to transform lives and hearts of folks. But if you're ready to start getting into your communities, meeting your neighbors, figuring out how to transform communities, Shonda, I think you're making an excellent point. You gotta let your rich young rulers go. And I see somebody piping in on chat that says, I had to walk away from some rich young rulers just last week. Amen. Sometimes you gotta let some people go and let God work on them. Everybody is not your case study. So I wanted to spend these last few minutes that we have, and I am seeing your questions coming in, so thank you so much. I do want to take a pause here because I can't see Facebook. Larry, do we have any questions coming in on Facebook that we need to look at? Okay, he says, no, we're good on Facebook. So I want to talk a little bit about two things before we close up. Shonda, I'm going to close with a question about your book itself. But before that, I want to talk with you and Dana about how you start to build bridges. We were just talking about, the reality of communities who live in very different realities, people in communities who live in very different realities. The picture you showed us of where you're situated in San Jose, Dana, was just a beautiful image. You got this huge, gaping high rises, and then the close-up picture of essentially a tent city right outside your door. And so if you could talk to us a little bit about how you bring together traditional power with neighborhood and community power.
Well, I think for us, that's the healing community model of Recovery Café. It works that way. I mean, and we're located in this situation where we can actually be conveners. And I think that's a really amazing role that actually many spiritual leaders can do, is to be the conveners of conversations in the community, of finding people across the gaps and bringing them together to talk to each other, and being sure that you set those times that you get together up in a way where the power is such that those who normally are marginalized really have their voices dominant in the conversation. So some of the ways we hosted is in Shonda's book, the story of a World Cafe that we hosted, where people sit around in fours around the table, and we had people who were city council staff members and heads of agencies and social workers and homeless people and people living in subsidized housing, and talking about transportation. as part of our way. And people actually heard stories from both ends that they never heard before because they never talked to each other around a coffee table, you know. So that's one of the ways we did. Another things we did was our local organizing committee, you know, worked with some students to create a survey, and we went and we just sat in some of the meal programs in the shelters around town, and we took those surveys with us, and we just sat one-on-one and had conversation after conversation after conversation to really learn what the real stories of people's lives are and what they're facing. We even at the cafe now, we have focus groups where we don't want to create classes and things like that our members don't want. So we have focus groups and we ask them, what do you want? What do you need? Which classes are helping you? And what, and we're all learning. I think we find that, I mean, we have board members at Recovery Cafe who are on our board because their children are struggling with their mental health challenges or their addiction. Some of them don't even know where they are. And we feel the solidarity in those moments when we're all no different. We're all in the same thing together. And I feel more and more that the transformation that we're about needs to come from us who are trying together all to be good news to the poor, because we can't look to the dominant culture to solve this for us. We're not even going to change the dominant culture to do this. I think we have to create these alternative organizations, alternative economies, alternative communities that we create. I mean, we deal with so many people coming out of jail and who can't get jobs because of the whole system is set up to not hire them. Because of a criminal record, even though they've made all the reparations they need to make. So we feel like we got to start social enterprises, Homeboy Industries, Delancey Streets, all these sorts of things where we create our own economies and our own jobs, because we can't look to others to do this. So I think this is a lot of what those conversations are about for us.
And this is what's so exciting about church to me, at least the potential of church, is getting to be the alternative. And I know a number of people have been kind of talking about class privilege and moving from charity to justice and lack of diversity being a challenge. And at the same time, I remember preaching at a big steeple church, a very posh, high-end, sophisticated church of a brand name denomination, a much fancier denomination than the Disciples of Christ. And in this big, fancy, regal church, I preached about mass incarceration. And I did it largely because I was afraid that in the wake of the 2016 election, the stuff that we had been fighting for was going to get lost in the midst of all of the new horrors we were dealing with. And so I kind of made a commitment that all of 2017, as many sermons as I could, I was going to preach about mass incarceration, no matter where I got invited. And I remember a couple, a very well-dressed white couple, come up to me after church and say, "Thank you. Our son is in prison, and we never feel like there's a place where we can acknowledge it." And I just had this moment where I realized the church, in its attempt to be inclusive, has created a culture of shame of talking about our lived experiences. So in these communities that we think aren't diverse, first of all, I used to live in a really rich community, and everybody thought my father was the gardener because all of them hired Mexican gardeners. And so that community that was all white except for my family, they had plenty of brown folks there. It's just they had to leave at the end of the day except for my father. And so there is actually a lot more diversity in our communities, if not racial, then socioeconomic. So what do we do with the fact that there are folks who have to commute into our community to work at our dry cleaners and our Starbucks and our McDonald's, if our neighborhoods will allow a McDonald's? And also, what do we do with the fact that our congregations have often created cultures where we're not allowed to bring the fullness of who we are? That was why for Dana's congregation, which actually, when I was with them when they were working on that mission statement before Dana got there, it was not a low income, uneducated congregation of color. It had lots of color. It had a lots of diversity of education, but it was a congregation that said we need to be in recovery from the dominant culture, because they knew that even for those of them with lots of resources, even for those of them with lots of education, even for those of them who had houses in the most expensive place in the world, in the country to live, the dominant culture was making them sick. And so I think there's something to this notion of, do I have time to show one more picture?
Mm-hmm.
All right. There is something to this notion of what it means to preach ourselves and talk ourselves and de-shame ourselves into a new way of being. And so the image I've got here is a church in the village of Les Chambons, France, during World War II. And for nigh on a decade, Pastor Alexander Trocmé preached the same sermon every Sunday, and it was, you are Protestants, you are the descendants of Huguenots, y'all know what it was like to be kicked out of a place because you were not of the dominant religion. You all know what it means to follow Christ, and that means a path of peace, and it means a path of protecting those with less. And they were not a poor community. They were not an under-resourced community, but they were a community that Sunday after Sunday after Sunday heard, here's what it means to be the community that follows Christ. Came when the Vichy government over in France, the Nazi-affiliated government took over in France. The village of Les Chambons rescued thousands of Jewish people and intellectuals and LGBT folks and Roma, or who were referred to as gypsies, all of the folks who were being attacked by the Nazi regime in Germany. The village of Les Chambons rescued more than their population because they had gotten a message over and over that this is what it means to be who you are, so that when the moment arose, they were equipped to show up. And they are honored in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. They're still celebrated for the role that they played. And it was because in advance of a totalitarian regime showing up, they were reminded what it meant to resist totalitarianism. And I think that that matters for us today as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I hear you both talking about the revolution. I don't know what other people heard, but I heard ultimate economies. I heard rescuing folks from the dominant. I mean, I heard it. I heard the revolution. So I'm excited. I want to go ahead and honor our time. We wanted to do about 45 minutes of conversation. And so we've hit about that point. But I did want to close us with just a little bit, just a second, Shonda, to give you some time to comment on what you think the book has done. You wrote the book, you said, self-admitted, to encourage yourself. You needed to see good news. And so you wrote this book to encourage yourself. Tell us, is it working?
It absolutely is. And I think what's really exciting for me is I spent nigh on a decade doing congregational transformation work. And I felt like I met with congregation after congregation who said, that sounds good, but that's too much work. And then all of a sudden in this last couple of years, and particularly since the book came out, I'm getting to talk with all these congregations who are like, oh, holy crud, things are really bad. We need to be a part of this. And we don't know where to start. And so there's something really exciting about the fact that I'm like, you could start with a World Café. You could start with a Truth Commission. This is all stuff that a handful of folks reaching out to their neighbors can do really easily. And so there's been something super fun in the midst of one of the more troubling times that I've been alive for in my organizing career. There's been something really fun about the folks who I had kind of given up on, saying, nope, it's time to put on our marching shoes. And I'm really excited about the ways that people are saying, all right, tell us what to do and we'll do it. And it's really exciting to have this book where I'm like, here are 10 different ways that anybody can do anywhere in the world. So it's been really fun, and I'm really excited in the same way that with Pre-Post Racial America, I got to hear people say, we realized we had no relationship with the mosque down the road and we need to do that. I cannot wait for a couple of months down the road, the stories to start pouring in where people are saying, yep, here's what we've done as a result. So people are beginning to think about it now. I can't wait to hear what happens next.
Excellent. And we're excited too. So if you have some of those stories bubbling up, because I see you on chat, I see those who are lifting up, oh, this is just really hard work. Sometimes the congregations reject these messages we're trying to share. We get it. Rejection is part of it. If you're doing something and you're not being rejected, it's probably not even the right thing. So keep on keeping on. Don't give up. This is part of it, right? But we want to continue to encourage you. So for those of you who have these stories bubbling up, please do check in on our Facebook page. Go ahead and find this recording there. And comment with your stories of inspiration, your stories of transformation, the things you're trying, the things you're hoping for. Go ahead and share those with us. And then you really should get a copy of this book, Transforming Communities. So we're going to help you out today. Chalice Press has been so very generous. For those of you who have held on to the end of this webinar, God bless you. It was not for nothing. You now are going to get a discount code for 30% off the book. So if you're ready, I want you to get your pen and paper and write this down, NBA 30. So capital N, capital B, capital A, and the number 30, 30. And that is your code when you're purchasing the book on Chalice Press. I see Shonda's trying to say something, but she can't get through. Oh, okay, she's fine. All right, so I'm also going to put it here in the chat box that the discount, Larry beat me to it. The discount code is MBA30, so you should see it in the chat box. Go ahead and cut and paste that. You're gonna want to go to the Chalice Press website and purchase it from there. Obviously, you could purchase the book on Amazon and some other places, but if you purchase it from Chalice Press, you can use that discount code and get your 30% off. Some folks have asked about the slides. We didn't prepare these slides in advance and didn't know how our story would go, how our conversation would go. So I will leave it up to the presenters to let me know after the webinar if they can share some of the slides that they gave and shared with you. And if you registered for this webinar, we'll be able to follow up with you. In our follow-up email, we'll include those slides as we are able. We'll also go ahead and include a link to purchase the book to Chalice Press, as well as a discount code. You'll see that Larry has posted that link to Chalice Press in the chat window instead. If you're in your chat window and you're watching us on Zoom as we close out, you can go down to the bottom of your chat window. So go ahead and click chat, open it. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you should see a box with a drop-down arrow that says more. If you click on more, the first option should be save chat. So that's another way. If you don't have time to copy and paste right now, go ahead and save this chat. You'll get all this fun information, the links, discount code, and we'll make sure that you get that. You'll have it for yourself. But like I said, if you registered for this webinar, you will also get it in the follow-up email after this email. So I want to thank Reverend Dana Bainbridge and Reverend Sandhya Jha for sharing their experiences with us, being so open and real. We see the thank yous coming in on the chat window. Thank you so much. We are just honored to be in your presence and to get this chance to share with you so that we can begin to internalize what we are also being called to do to heal our neighborhoods. We also want to thank Danny Cartwright and Larry Morris for supporting us in the background. Thank you so much. And we want to thank Casey Zeminski, who made sure that Twitter would point folks right back this way. So we're thankful for that. And especially want to thank our co-host, Chalice Press, Brad Lyons, and all those in the marketing department who supported us and came up with these codes so that we can get this sweet discount. All right. So we thank you so much. We are going to record, we have recorded this. And so we'll also include a link to the recording in that follow-up email. Otherwise, we hope to see you next time. If you want to see what's going on with NBA, you can find us at nbacares.org, and you can get a sense of all of the webinars that we have coming up soon. But thanks you all. It's good to be with you. See you next time.